Christian, appreciate the time as always. How you been, my friend?
I've been good, brother. Thanks for calling me in again, man. Stoked to talk about this a little bit. Chop it up.
So let me start you off and appreciate you coming on with Drew Allar. I was just saying this before we brought you on. He is like unintentionally polarizing. Like, really good kid, comes from a good background, right? Really hardworking, says all the right things, but the analysis is all over the place when people evaluate his game. I really liked what he showed in the Big Ten championship game. I thought his best moment was the second half up against USC earlier in the year. Where's your evaluation right now on the Penn State quarterback?
Yeah, it's pretty similar. I think you and I talked about it before the season, or at least I talked to some folks about it before the season. I mean, he's shown me some things. For me, it's always been more of the intangible side. I think when it just comes down to throwing the football from point A to point B, he has everything that you're looking for. And on tape, he's put things in terms of mobility and pocket movement and stuff like that that definitely checks all the boxes. But there's always that little something like Baker has it, like these guys have it in terms of when the lights are brightest. Those guys are making plays consistently, and they're making not only their team better, but their individual players around them better, like kind of raising the floor for everybody. And Drew's done some of that this year, but maybe some of it's just he's not being asked to do it as much. I don't know, but I think that's my only missing piece with Drew when I'm evaluating him. Like, is he a guy who can come in and be the face of my franchise? And to your point, it's not about saying all the right things and doing it publicly. It's more so about in that locker room. Can he get those guys to want to play for him? And do they believe that he's the guy who can make a difference in a game? And I still think that a lot of that, at least from a consistency standpoint, is to be seen yet.
Now, how confident are you with this team? Because I understand, right? They've made it to the Final Eight. You look at this squad, they got some big-time players with an Abdul Carter and also Tyler Warren. We've seen the growth, and there's still room to continue to grow, as we were talking about with Drew Allar, as Christian Hackenberg's here with us. But this is a team that, they haven't had a big victory yet this year. Oregon, they lost. Ohio State, they lost. And now you're still 3 wins away from somehow getting a national championship. Your confidence with this group is where right now?
Listen, I think that there's some deficiencies in the team. Obviously, we don't have to dive too far into that, but they got some really good football players, and I think they're deep enough. If the game can play into kind of how this team's built, and I think it's really good defense. Offense doesn't necessarily have to get into a track meet. If they get into a track meet, they've proven they could do it a little bit, but I don't think it's a consistent thing. I don't think they have enough weapons. They need to be able to run the football, and to do that, you can't be in too big of a hole. So. Listen, the path is pretty clean, and I think you could say the same for like a Texas path, and that kind of is out of their control. So to me, they just need to continue to do what they've done up until this point, handling SMU. They're going into this matchup like, what is it, a 14.5 point favorite or something like that, somewhere in that ballpark. So then you're going to have a chance against a Georgia or a Notre Dame, and then continue to hopefully get over that hump of beating a football team that you're not necessarily going to be favored by at least a touchdown on. So I'm confident they'll at least get to that. And then I think that there's some things that we'll see in terms of how the game's called, who steps up, who starts to get used a little more. Is there a little bit more creativity with some shots and things like that in there, at least offensively, that gives me confidence they could do it against the Georgias and the big dogs of the world. So I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic, and most of that is because of the path. I mean, it's a very light path, and we don't have to continue to beat that drum.
Christian Hackenberg here with us. On the other side, everyone's going to talk about Ashton Genty. I've watched almost every one of his snaps this year. We all know the incredible talent he is. But I actually think if Boise State's going to win this game, it's going to come down to Maddox Madsen, because I don't know if Penn State will be able to stop Genty, because no one has this year. But this is not a dude that's turned over the football a lot. He's had some risky throws, but they've been dropped down the stretch if you watch the last few games of the season. But if he could just be efficient in this one and manage the game, then I think we're going to have a game that comes right down to the wire. What's your read from afar on Maddox Madsen?
Yeah, same thing. I think a lot of that's beneficial because he has Genty behind him. At the end of the day, you're asked not to turn the football over when you're in the position to turn around and hand it off to a guy like that. But he's done a good job of doing that up into this point. And I think for Penn State, like you said, that's kind of who they want to force to beat them. So I agree with your synopsis. Like, Genty's still going to get his at some point throughout this game, but similar to how that SMU game played out. If Penn State wants to have a chance to do what Vegas is at least predicting them to do, they need to slow him down enough and get enough of a lead to where Boise State has to put more of that workload on Maddox and less on Ginty and start chasing some points. But yeah, I mean, I think they feel comfortable with that though. Penn State's got a great D line. Their rush is phenomenal, and I feel really confident about their back end. Obviously, big storyline. Their linebackers played well, but I still think that's if I'm coming in game planning against Penn State, that's the area of their defense I'm trying to exploit is their linebackers. I think that's a group that has a high ceiling, but just hasn't played consistently enough to give me confidence in their ability to be difference makers consistently in a football game.
Is there starting to become a little quiet confidence from the Penn State fan with James Franklin, or is it still, hey, this dude just doesn't win big games?
I think it's all over the map, right? And it's one of those things where at least this year, my take back hasn't been that they lost that Ohio State game because of some egregious mismanagement of the clock, or they just looked scared. Like they didn't look like they wanted to win the football game in terms of how they were calling it, either offensively or defensively. I think it just came down to situational football. Like they were 0 for 4 in 4 situations that they couldn't be 0 for 4 against. They showed some great fight against Oregon. So the losses feel a little bit different this year. I think that's a positive sign, trending upward for Coach. But he's got a great opportunity to make a lot of those voices and talking heads go away if he's able to continue this run here in the playoff, because they'll very quickly forget a lot of all that stuff if they can make it to the college football playoff semifinal and get a few more wins here under their belt. So I think it's up in the air, but it's just one of those things. I think Colton Ecke's been a great aid, at least on that side of the ball. I think he's got a lot of confidence in him, which I think has been different from the past few years as it pertains to the offensive coordinators.
Christian Hackenberg here with us. All right, get into Texas, Arizona State. Arizona State's going to play with no fear. It's just the way that a Kenny Dillingham team has played all year. Scadaboo's really good. Levitt doesn't get enough credit. But I'm looking at Texas. I think there's a big moment for Quinn Ewers because, hey, I get it. They've only have 2 losses on the year. They're 12-2. They won the Big 12 last year. First year in the SEC. They're in the SEC championship game. But there's always that feeling with Quinn Ewers, just get us to Arch Manning, right, if you're a Longhorn fan. But this guy's won a lot of games at Texas. What kind of performance do you expect from Quinn Ewers coming up on New Year's Day up against Arizona State?
I think he needs a big one. I've been a big Quinn Ewers fan. He gave me a lot of reasons to be excited after last year, being able to go and beat Bama. And he's won some big games for him, and he's played really well. The last few weeks, though, I've just seen maybe it is that hey, we just want to get to Arch, like get it pushing, see what happens, get him up out of here. Maybe that's getting to him a little bit, but I've just seen him do some things that are just uncharacteristic of a guy who's played that much football. The one interception he threw against Georgia, I mean, he tried to throw like a stop route into 2-man. It's like, dude, like that's you can't make that mistake. But there's just been some things like that in his game that has shown up in the past few weeks that have scared me. So I think he really needs to have a big one, completely capable of it. I think he's a really talented passer. So I hope he gets the chance to have a heavier workload this week and at least try to silence some of those qualms, because I do like this Texas team. If he's playing good football and that defense plays to their capabilities, it's a team that I think can win it all.
You look at the next level. Right now, it's pretty clear in some order, Shedeur or Cam Ward are going to go 1-2 in terms of quarterbacks off the board. The third quarterback is a little tricky, right? Quinn Ewers at times has been mentioned this year. Dillon Gabriel, if he goes and beats Ohio State twice in a season, I'm sure that name will start to rise up a lot from a second-round pick to a first-round pick. When you look at the future of Quinn Ewers and also Dillon Gabriel in the NFL, just where do you kind of evaluate both of them in terms of how you prognosticate them at the next level?
Yeah, I think Dillon has a lot of the intangible stuff you really like. He's played at 3 different schools, whatever it is now, and he's won at every single one of them. He doesn't really do anything that like wows you, right? But he's an efficient, accurate passer, can extend plays with his legs. I think both of those guys are guys where if they get in the right system with the right guys and it's the right fit, they're both guys who can succeed. What type of succeed that is, like I don't think it's going to be an all pro type of guy, but they're both going to be guys who can play for a while and find a role in the NFL in some capacity. But I don't necessarily think they're guys that, from a talent standpoint, are going to be able to transcend a bunch of things not necessarily going their way, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. Christian Hackenberg here with us. Who do you lean right now on New Year's Day at the Rose Bowl, the granddaddy of them all? Ohio State or is it Oregon right now in your mind?
Listen, the one thing I'm really curious to see is this lag time, right? Like you have some of these teams who've played now and they're in rhythm, and then the Oregons and everyone who had a bye. I'm curious to see what's going to happen. I got a lot of confidence in Dan Lanning having those guys ready to go. I don't think it's going to be an issue. I think Dylan Gabriel is a big part of that as well. Just a guy who's played a lot of ball vet. But the way Ohio State played against Tennessee, like I thought that was the most impressive, telling performance of the first round. That's a team that looked like they have it all as well. If they, it's always an if, right? It's always an if you can continue to play that type of ball. But the one thing that I'll at least say, just experientially, is like I have a ton of respect for Ohio State. Like I think that program has always done a good job of showing up in the biggest moments. It doesn't necessarily always go their way, but they come ready to go. So it's tough to beat a team twice, man. Like Ohio State's got the hot hand, but a lot of it I think is going to tell, like, is there any type of knocking off the dust, knocking off the rust that you typically get when you have a longer break period for bowl games and stuff for Oregon? Because if there is any of that and Ohio State comes out hot, it could be one of those situations where Oregon's actually running from behind, chasing points, and I think Ohio State wants to be in the driver's seat from that side of things.
Yeah, and there's many ways that we talk about, right, in all those three other matchups, you're like, can you win the big game? I think there's a big question. Marcus Freeman's going nowhere. He just signed that new extension. But Notre Dame, even before he got there, they've been kind of stuck in my lifetime of being a really good program, but when they get in these big games, they can't get the job done. I compare Georgia to basically the Chiefs right now, where even when people say they're vulnerable, they're still there. I get it. They're now going to a backup quarterback with Carson Beck down. But I think there's an enormous amount of pressure on Marcus Freeman to get the job done coming up on what would be Wednesday evening.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. The thing is that's a really good football team. I love their defense. They can run the heck out of the football. They're physical on both sides of the lines of scrimmage. I think Riley Leonard's a really, really good athlete. I think he's a really good athlete. I just don't know if he's a guy who's going to win the football game with his arm consistently yet. And I think that's kind of I think that's been the differentiator for Marcus Freeman up there at that position, is having a guy consistently that you can put the ball in his hand and say, hey, go win it. And every other one of these programs we've talked about has had at least one or two of those guys in recent memory. And I think that's just been the differentiator with Notre Dame.
Hey, one more, just following back to Ohio State. Will Howard, where are you at with him right now when you evaluate his game?
Yeah, kind of the same thing. I don't know, man. He's fun. I got to watch him play live against Penn State up there, and it's weird, man. He's got a lot of talent around him. I don't think that he's necessarily gotten the maximum production out of everything that's been around him. I don't know, man. I just think he's a guy. Like, I think he's good. I think he's got some things that he does well. Every guy does that's playing at that level. But I just don't know if it's like anything that's, hey, sell the ship, sell the boat. We really got to get this guy in there. Like, I still live on the fence of, like, I don't know if it was an upgrade from Kyle McCord personally. Wow. Like, I think Kyle McCord throws the football really, really well. I think if you put Kyle McCord in good situations and played to his strengths more consistently, like, I think Kyle would have done and thrived really well with what's been around him. Will brings a little bit more from just a twitch, like a pure athlete standpoint. But I mean, just throwing the football, I don't know if it was an upgrade.
Yeah, I thought McCord was more steady. But with Howard, like the Penn State game, man, that dude's a great leader. He'll run through a wall, do whatever. And then there's just moments like the Michigan game where the ceiling and to the floor, I don't know which way it's going to go. He's all over the place. And obviously, when he's hitting the ceiling, it's like, wow, but then there's a big drop off and it can happen real quickly with him.
Yeah, it's just it's one of those things that's, I think when you're talking about, hey, I want to go and take this next step in your career, and fortunately these college kids they're not in a position where they have to go chase dollars anymore, or they have to go get out of a bad situation. They can just transfer. Like, I think for him, he still has some brushing up to do on that consistency in terms of you said it great. I was at a loss of words. I appreciate you there. But like raising that floor for him, because that's another conundrum and head scratcher. Like I think he does some things really well, but it's just then he does some things and you're like, where did that come from and why is that happening right now? So we'll see. He's all these guys. That's the beauty of this whole thing, man. That's why I love college football. Like they get an opportunity to change the narrative each week here, as long as they're still alive. And the lights, and you know how that goes. The lights and the momentum. Like some of these guys, they take advantage of it here. Who knows what could happen come April when it comes draft time if these guys do decide to go. Just because people tend to lean towards what they've seen, the new shiny toy, however they finish. And I've said the same thing even about Drew. Like if Drew gets hot here and beats two teams that he shouldn't beat, I think he's a guy who goes in the conversation. Like if Penn State wins the national championship on Drew's back, it's like, would it be smart for him to stay, or would he have a conversation as being that third guy taken if he does what he needs to do? Because I think this draft class is that wide open after the two that you mentioned.
So you think there's a chance, even though he said he was coming back, that if he goes and wins it all, man, maybe that whole situation turns over and he goes to the NFL?
Listen, like I said, I think that's one of those ones where you can't pass up. I don't care how much money he's getting to come back to Penn State. You can't pass up whatever it's going to be a top 10 pick.
Yeah.
You can't do it. And I think
hey, vote for Beulah. You want to come back?
Championship, that's what I'm saying. I think it's but that was my example of the unfortunate timing of the whole transfer portal and all this stuff. Is like you think you got Drew locked in, but again, it's one of those things like someone could just pick up and leave. There's no contract signed. There's no locking him into these things. Like again, he could go out and throw for 300-400 yards in the semifinal in the national championship game, and I think the media would probably eat that up. And that's where it starts pinballing into, well, you might as well ride this momentum to a top 10 draft pick because you're not going to make that money in college and you're losing 40%, probably 40 to 60% of your offensive production and Tyler Warren and probably one of your backs, So it's just one of those really interesting conversations that I don't think anyone's talking about because it may be so far out there. And I don't even think Drew might have thought about it, but, I think it would be dumb not to think about that if that were to happen.
Now, I haven't thought about that, but it's an excellent conversation piece. Christian Hackenberg, the former Penn State quarterback, we appreciate it. Thanks for doing this again.
Yeah, brother. Appreciate you, man.